So if we went on a date.
Yeah. I feel like we've been on the line.
Yeah, indeed. I wouldn't be myself if I didn't give a shameless plug for a film that we put together that opens this weekend called Green Book. It has nothing to do with the theme of this panel, but I will give you a time-back guarantee if you don't love it, and that means I'll go cut your lawn or do your laundry or something for 2 hours. But on to business. It doesn't say it anywhere, but I'm the moderator of this panel, so keep that in mind. I'll tell you, we'll have plenty of time for questions, so think of plenty of questions. But I'll tell you what got me super excited about this subject, and really of the belief that brands are the studios of the future, was the sort of confluence of two cultural things that are happening. One, the sort of gradual disappearance of the 30-second commercial, and a period of sort of instability for brands where they're trying to figure out the next iteration of brand messaging. And the second was something I said, there was sort of a light bulb that went off in my head last year. I produced 2 films for Amazon last year, and what they made clear to me in the process of making these movies and green lighting them is that they have a double bottom line. And their double bottom line is they want to monetize these films like any other studio does. And they're very serious about that, and they do, traditional windowing, and they have P&A and smart entertainment, executives. But they have an added benefit that that the other media companies, conglomerates don't, and that is they've got Amazon Prime, which if films eventually show on Amazon Prime and people are drawn to it because of these films, then they're going to buy toilet paper and all the other things you buy on Amazon Prime. So that enabled, from their perspective, them to sort of greenlight films that media companies that just lived and died only by consumption of the media itself, from the content itself, couldn't. And that, when you overlay that with the idea that brands are, not only are they great marketers and they know their audience, they know their constituents, are scrambling to find a way to convey their message to the public and keep in the public's mind, leads to the reasonable conclusion that brands are going to slowly move toward becoming real content creators, real storytellers, that they can understand that there's no real business in making long-form commercials because you can't entertain people with long-form commercials. So anyway, these are the things that are swirling around. These are the topics that I think we should all talk about. And the one of us up here who's really currently immersed in it, Allison, I would say it's you. So I'm going to shut up and let you talk about what the thinking is over at Gatorade, what the thinking is at PepsiCo, and what you see maybe as the future of extended storytelling, on behalf of brands, financed by brands, and how brands will be incorporated into that.
Sure. Is this working? Great. I would say, given that in the role that I'm in, we work with 27 different brands, that every brand has a different place on the spectrum of commercials being the main way to communicate, and then potentially long form being the way to communicate. I don't think it's right for every brand. You have to have credibility to be in that space. Otherwise, people are going to see right through it. And primarily, our audience is millennials, and we all talk about how they require authenticity. So a brand like Gatorade has earned the right to tell emotional stories. People are very easily brought along. We're making a feature-length doc that Gatorade is the executive producer of, which I'll talk about in a second. We had a doc last year, a short doc that I'm working on with these two esteemed gentlemen to turn into a scripted narrative feature. There are other brands. I don't want to name them per se because they're all my children in a sense. But there are other brands for whom it's not right. So, you know, when you look at Lego, you look at Red Bull, there are brands that it's where it works. And I think from a strategy perspective, the studio where I work was born from the need to communicate with our consumers differently. So I would say at Pepsi, our TV initiatives have not changed. Everything that we're doing is incremental. And it's a slow evolution. I mean, again, there are brands for whom it's a risk and brands want to take a chance and the project is an experiment. There are brands ready to roll. Mountain Dew made a film. Mountain Dew made a doc that John and I were talking about. So it's really an evolution. And I think that the performance metrics are still being resolved. I think that's part of the problem. If I was a brand manager and I say to myself, where is my money best spent? The long form business is a long-term play, right? It's an equity play. And I can't tell you that somebody walks out of our Gatorade long form movie and buys a Gatorade. But I can tell you that we're building consistency over time and we're making sure that we don't lose this person over time. So you can measure monetization, selling the rights to the film, but I think there's still a lot of metrics that have yet to be figured out in terms of the business side of selling product.
But there's an enthusiasm to try and figure out and collect data on that.
Absolutely. I mean, we're actually doing an independent study to really figure out what the metrics are. But yeah, I mean, every brand wants to do it. I just would caution it may not be right for every brand.
So I promise not to monopolize this panel, but I am going to tell one more story.
Yes.
about a while ago. Mountain Dew came to us, and they were financing a documentary called First Descent, which starred Shaun White and Hannah Teeter, two snowboarders, and there was really no indication of Mountain Dew, and there was like a sticker for Mountain Dew on the bottom of one of their snowboards, but there was no reference in the film. And the film was really good. And I said to the people at Mountain Dew, I said, boy, we can actually make some money on this film. And they had this stricken look on their face, like, what do you mean?
Right.
How do we, and they go, we don't even have any way to take in money if we made money. So
Right.
I said, well, I can take care of that for you.
Right.
Forget I ever said anything. No,
But that also gets to an issue that brands, because they're accustomed to working with agencies, they're accustomed to owning everything. And they have had to learn really slowly that it's okay not to own 100%. And that's been one of the biggest hurdles. So now we have brands that will co-finance, brands that will participate, brands that will invest. And it's a complete learning curve for them because their traditional model is the agency's on retainer, you own all the creative ideas. So what do you mean I can't call the shots completely on a project?
Yeah.
If I'm not the 100% owner, right? I mean, it's like an interesting.
It's a fascinating tension.
Yeah,
and,
it's great.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I have a feeling that you, Sarah, are going to find yourself in the middle of it soon enough. So you spent a long time at HBO. You are now at the newly recapitalized Imagine Entertainment, on the verge of a sort of, I think well-funded, on the verge of a sort of Wild West, Brave New World here. And I guess you wouldn't be up here if you didn't see brands as a possible way to, part of your focus in the future. So what is the current thinking at Imagine?
Yeah, so for me personally, it's really interesting to kind of do a 360 and be on this side of the table, having been at a place like HBO for almost 20 years, where obviously there is no advertising, and we've rarely worked with brands, although it was starting to sort of creep in, I think, as I was transitioning to Imagine. But I have to say, what's sort of funny or interesting for me, having been in, on the content side for as long as I have, particularly with documentaries, is that, for so long, most of our documentary filmmakers would direct commercials, or they would shoot commercials, and it was really how people made a living. And
Between projects.
yeah, I mean, but like
In
really
between being
yeah.
underpaid by HBO, is that what you mean?
Never by HBO. But but documentary filmmaking, it was a struggle. You were trying to raise grant money, independent money, places like HBO, PBS. I mean, it's only been recently, right, the past 5 to 10 years, the rise of all the platforms, Netflix, and all these alternative platforms really to finance documentaries. So I actually takes quite a lot of pleasure in this idea that, for so long, doc makers would shoot commercials, make commercials. It was like kind of their dirty little secret about how they really made money. And some filmmakers made a lot of money shooting commercials. So it seems only, really satisfying probably to a lot of these directors to find that now there's actually a lot of currency and value in their storytelling for brands. And, as Ali was saying, it's sort of this interesting space where they've been so used to, and I'm only speaking secondhand because I personally have never directed a commercial, but just from my filmmaking friends that I know, they were used to just shooting and handing over the creative material and not really being a part of sort of the end direction or the end result. So I think it's really, really, it's just amazing that brands are out there seeing sort of the relevance and really the value in a particular style of filmmaking, which is documentary filmmaking. So I think that's very exciting. And I think from Imagine Documentaries' perspective, and I'm very happy to be here today, and I feel in a way that I'm standing in for my partner in crime in this endeavor, Justin Wilkes, who has much experience sort of working in the branded space. But it is a solid initiative at our newly formed Imagine Documentaries division. And I think for us, it'll probably always come down to, what is the story that we are trying to tell collectively. And I see it as like if you're buying a subscription to a platform, if you're buying Amazon Prime, if you're buying HBO or HBO Now, Netflix, Hulu, whatever it is, you're already kind of contributing to a consumer culture. So the idea that brand integration would somehow kind of slip into the idea of content creation or storytelling, doesn't really shock me. I think it's more about sort of, how can you really tell the best story that you want to tell? And I think, like I said, for us at Imagine, we recognize that we will be partnering with certain brands on projects most likely. But I think for us, it will always be about what is the story we're trying to tell, and does it make sense for us as producers, as the directors we're working with? Is there integrity to the way that we approach the story? And so on. So hopefully that answered your question.
Absolutely. I forgot, you're right. Justin worked at Radical Media for years, so of course he's going to default.
I kind of invented this in some ways, probably, integration.
Yeah. So Eric Sloss, you, in addition to being our head of sales, you are basically leading our initiative into I guess brand integration and working with brands. What are your observations in general on that, on what brands are thinking and where they're going and what the possibilities are?
For sure. I mean, so my day job is to do licensing deals for all of our completed films in North America. So 90% of my day is to find distribution, and most of those films are documentaries. Very traditional business, but I would say not on the side, increasingly less on the side. I've been working with brands, one of which is Gatorade and Alley and a few more, to not only make content, but I think the thing that we kind of forget is to distribute content. Most of the time when we're talking about brand and entertainment, the thing we think about is what can the brand bring to the filmmaker to help get a film made. But it actually is useful to an extent to think about it as what can the brand bring to distribution, and how can that actually help the filmmaker in getting their films out. So one of the things that we have a perpetual problem with in indie distribution is that there's too many films and not enough people to do them, and there's not enough specific attention to finding a specific audience for that film, right? There's a way to release a film. You go through that same process kind of over and over again. There's a certain amount of money allocated, and it's really a P&L against a single film. what we've never been able to do, at least on the independent level, is spend real money finding discrete audiences and helping those audiences come to films. And what brands have an uncanny ability to do is find the pipeline to their discrete audiences. You know, we had a meeting maybe 6 months ago when we were talking about some of these projects with Gatorade, and the Gatorade executive said, well, we have this network of like 100,000 youth athletes that we can tap into. Do you want us to do that? And I said, yes, that would be great. Please, let's do that. And that's a resource that almost no distributor will ever have for a specific film, is to have an immediate pipeline to their specific audience, right? So exploring opportunities like that, so not just a brand that's financing a piece of content and helping create a piece of content, but a brand that really is able to flex their marketing muscles in a collaborative way instead of a cannibalizing way, like is kind of traditionally understood, is what makes me, as a person who conducts these sales all the time, probably the most excited. And that's where I see the real opportunity, not just as financiers, but as distribution and marketing partners.
And I don't think the brands even realize how much power they have yet. I think it's going to take a few of these to really make a huge splash, because they know they have a huge network, they know they have a database, they know they have social channels, but I mean, if you think about it, brands are basically all about their demographic and their audience, right? So you combine a brand that knows exactly where its consumers live and what they're interested in with a great storyteller, it's magic. Like, that's the answer, right? So that's why you have to be very careful what you greenlight.
Right.
And I think a lot of brands don't know how to intersect with content. They don't know what it means. Branded entertainment, to me, is a phrase we should all stop using. Product placement is garbage.
Right.
Like, to me, we've invented at PepsiCo the brand as the executive producer. Like, that's, to me, that's what we've done. It may go away in 2 years,
Right.
but like, that's what we're doing right now.
I mean, I'm
And I think-
fascinated.
Well, no, but I mean, like, because we're so on the wild, wild west that I don't know, something better may come
But what's
along.
going to take its place? It's not like the 30-second commercial is coming back.
No, but what I think is even more interesting is sort of what you're saying and taking it even one step further. Like, at some point, the brands will probably become the distribution.
Yeah.
And I think that, I guess that's the point I was trying to make is, you know, I worked at a place like HBO for a long time, and it was always very important that people knew where to find those films. So whenever we put a film out into the world, when I was at HBO, it was, you know, we had to really brand it an HBO documentary. And it's sort of, it just makes me, you know, it makes me really think about this, because I think, again, you know, a platform is still, like I said, you're still exchanging.
It's a brand.
It's still a brand.
Right.
And so I think, you know, with Gatorade, to me, what will be interesting is sort of, as you're saying, how it all sort of integrates. Eventually, there could be a Gatorade platform, and someone may just land on it and not really, I guess at some point it's like Amazon, right? Like, you're not really thinking when you watch Amazon Prime right now that you're also being marketed to, but of course you are constantly. So to me, it's just really an evolution of where everything is headed in our world,
I mean,
I guess, right? It's very philosophical what I'm saying, but,
No,
but
but
I just think there's no difference anymore, right?
No, I mean, I had a sort of slow.
Nothing's pure is what I'm saying,
Right,
ever.
it's commerce. no
I
matter
had
what.
an
Right.
epiphany, evolving epiphany over time, that because I grew up in a culture where traditional content distributors created the impression that that they had a knowledge that the rest of us didn't have in terms of marketing, that justified them coming in and taking something that you had created yourself and they had nothing to do with, taking responsibility for it, being last in, first out, and basically deciding the fate of it. And what I came to realize is that there isn't really a lot of secret knowledge that distributors have. And when Allison, when you start talking about the knowledge that brands have about their audience, you actually can get very quickly to the conclusion that they understand marketing to their core audience better than distributors, film distributors understand marketing to a general or even a targeted audience. And in selling films and in distributing films, the sort of, you know, the holy grail is to know that you have an identifiable core audience that will respond to the film, that can serve as a base, that if the film is successful, you can then, you know, cross over from. And brands are arguably in a better position to identify that audience than distributors are. And when we talk about the brand as studio, we're not just talking about finance, we're talking about distribution. So.
And the demographics are really specific. I mean, we're working on a project right now where, you know, there's this really specific age group, and the brand gave us that criteria. There's a lot of science behind that, right? So to them, you know, it's the butter to their bread, right? Like and it goes back to direct marketing, right? It's coupon. I mean, it's the same with the business. Is just one big cycle right now. But I think it is an incredibly exciting time. I think, you know, the industry. I would say one of the things that hasn't caught up yet either is how the industry awards the best work, right? Because you still have branded categories and non-branded categories, and how, you know, if you want to get on ESPN, you have to go through programming or media sales. Like the industry, there's so many parts to this business that have yet to evolve, and you know, like you guys could have your own channel. Like Imagine could have its own.
We could
You could.
definitely. Well, it's sort of interesting because I'd love to hear actually from John or from Eric. I guess the real challenge is once you create a Gatorade-sponsored project, and Imagine right now is working on a documentary that we announced recently called Dads, which is actually being fully financed by Unilever. And it's being directed by Bryce Dallas Howard, and it came to us, I believe, and I'm not, again, really intimately involved in it, but the way I understand it, Unilever has sort of reached out and said, you know, we're working on a paternity leave initiative, right? And so we're trying to figure out, like, if we did something in this kind of world where we were to create a film, or you know, or sponsor or pay for a film, what, you know, is there a way to sort of convey the story? And my understanding was, you know, Bryce and actually Ron Howard as well got really excited about this because it is a topic that they're interested in. They have a father-daughter relationship. And so they are setting out to, you know, to tell really the story of fatherhood from multiple perspectives. But I think this idea that the brand reached out because they had an initiative that really was trying to say something and do good in the world, may have made a difference in Imagine's decision making to get on board that project. But I guess my question for Eric and for John is, the real test is the marketplace, right, and the distribution outlets. So we don't have distribution yet for this documentary, so we will have to take it out into the world. And so far, we've talked to people very casually about it.
Are you going to let us sell
I
it?
was going to say the first question is we'd like to sell it.
Possibly.
Yeah, I mean,
But there is
because we know the
excitement
answer.
about
We're
the
just not going to
project.
tell you until you hire us.
So it's just sort of interesting how will it be received in the marketplace, right?
Well, I mean,
and
here-
then I think
I-
that's part of the
I don't
bigger
wanna,
test for them.
and I don't want to keep my loquacious nephew from speaking, but I do want to say this.
In your own interest, you should.
Yes, perhaps. The marketplace is not a challenge in terms of this kind of buy-in from an audience standpoint. The audience doesn't care whether a brand financed something or not.
Not
They
at
just
all.
want to be entertained. The people who do care, and I find this super annoying, are the critics. When we worked on a film called A Faster Horse, which it was David Galbraith who did Jiro Dreams of Sushi. It was financed by Ford. It was about the creation of the new Mustang model, and top to bottom, it was a really solid, entertaining documentary. And the audience kind of loved it, but it was completely rejected out of hand as a long-form commercial by critics. And I feel like they're the last ones to get the memo that they've got to get over it. That is not how you judge a piece of content. And everyone else from the brands to the filmmakers to the audience is ahead of them in this regard.
I mean, but on the flip side, Meru had pretty significant support from North Face, and all of the climbers in Meru, I'm assuming everybody here is familiar with that, all the climbers were sponsored by North Face, and that found pretty great critical acclaim. There is, I would say, a necessary but arbitrary difference is that North Face didn't directly contribute to the production financing of that film, but there is almost no difference in terms of its effect in a promotional value, right? But there is the need for the critic to step in and say, because they financed it, this is icky. But if their name is on it and they didn't finance it, it's totally fine. But there's essentially no difference in that process.
But even if there was like I was going to say this, our dad's film, which is just starting up production, but I don't believe Unilever is going to be front and center in this project at all on
How
screen,
could they
or
be?
How could they be, right? So again, like, it'll be interesting because I don't think anyone would think about.
And I think like anything over time, either the critics are going to go away or they're going to get tired of complaining and they're just going to say, fine,
Right.
let's judge it
Or
on
the
its
sales
own
will
merit.
prove them wrong.
Or the
I
sales
mean,
will
there's
prove them
yeah,
wrong.
it's going to keep
But
happening.
critics, they think sales don't influence what they talk about. So I don't know that that's going to get them off it. So what was the Pepsi film? Was it Uncle Drew? Am I?
Yes.
Okay, can we talk about
Yes.
Uncle Drew a bit?
I have no right to talk about it from the extent
But
that
do you have any
I didn't
knowledge to
work
talk
on
about it?
Yes, of course. So,
Okay,
and
I
didn't
have no
work
right
on
to talk about anything,
No,
but
no,
that never
I just
stopped me.
want to. There are films that we're working on that I can totally own and take care of,
well-
but this one is peripheral. But I'd love
Okay,
to
but
talk
this
about
is a film. It's interesting because it was a financial success, from what I can tell.
Yes, absolutely.
And it wasn't really about product placement, and I think we all decry product placement to a certain extent because it's subconscious and it's kind of trickery. This had a lot of
This was
Pepsi
This was
references
Pepsi
in
Presents,
it.
that's right.
And,
And
well, no, but I mean within the film, like
Yes,
there
absolutely.
were decals on the basketball
That's
court
right.
and things like that.
Well, you have to go back to how it started. So about 5 or 6 years ago, Mark Gilbar, who's
Yeah,
now
Mark, who's now at Imagine,
who
heading
the
up our
time
branded
was
initiative.
Davy Brown, and the Pepsi brand team, Lou Arbiter and some other executives, came up with the character of Kyrie Irving in disguise as an old man. And the in disguise lined up with the brand strategy because it was in promotion of a new soda called Pepsi Max, which was a delicious, fully sugary soda in disguise as a diet soda. So there's the link strategically, right? So the brief, I'm sure, I wasn't in this company at the time, was come up with some vehicle about that something isn't what it appears to be and have a hell of a lot of fun, right? So Uncle Drew, the character, was born. And what happens is you can see it, he's on he shows up in an inner city basketball court, and the guy, kids are playing and they're fantastic, and they're like, hey, old man, let's see what you can do. And at first he's terrible, and then he's phenomenal, and he brings his cronies in and they have a blast, right? Kyrie Irving loved it. Pop culture took care of a lot of the marketing. People called Kyrie, when he played during the NBA, Uncle Drew. They would say, Kyrie got buckets. Like, they used a lot of his vernacular from the episodes, which lived on YouTube, and built their own huge audience. So a script was written, Lionsgate grabbed it, Pepsi put in a good chunk of money, and it really was a risk in that it was a super branded film. I mean, it's Pepsi Presents, there's Pepsi everywhere. Unlike the Gatorade film that I make, and I'm making, we don't even say Gatorade Presents. The word Gatorade does not exist. We made up the name of a production company called Win From Within Productions, which is their strategy in order to not turn people off. This is the total opposite. This is branded entertainment, brand integration, product placement. It is, and it's a brand created IP. And it was totally successful. And the truth is, like, we really didn't know. We knew it was funny, but the thing I'll say is, to me, it was like Sex and the City. Like, if you go see the Sex and the City movie, you know exactly what you're going to get. It's the same friends you've been following on TV.
And by the way, the same shoes that you want to buy as you watch it.
Yeah. So to me, like, I wasn't surprised that it was successful. I was just really happy that it was.
I mean,
and fabulous, good.
I think that goes back to a good story is a good
Right,
story,
right. The script is
and
funny.
people really responded to the story. And didn't they expand it, or they're expanding it into a feature? Is that true?
It is a feature.
It is a feature
Yeah,
now.
that
It was
was
a
a-
feature.
but-
I mean, there's talk
Sorry.
of
But
will
what
there
if-
be another one.
Right, will
Yeah.
it be another
But what thrilled me about it, I took my 11-year-old son, who completely loved it, but what thrilled me about it is when the lights went down, PepsiCo wasn't hiding. They said
Correct.
PepsiCo Studios
That's
presents.
right.
And
That's right.
to me, that's revolutionary.
Yep.
That they're fronting it and that people still want to see
Yep,
it.
it's like the Lego movie in that way,
Yeah.
I will say
which
that
was a huge success.
Which
Yeah.
is essentially Lego.
Yeah, yeah.
Selling
it's
a
the
product
Lego
at
movie.
the
It's
same
not
time.
even the name of somebody. At least we called it Uncle Drew, not the Pepsi movie.
I mean, there's a distinction, though, in that was a narrative film. In the doc world, some kind of outside source tampering with or potentially influencing the story does have a different kind of feeling to the doc community, right? It feels manipulative because there's like a purity to the doc community, or an assumed purity to the doc community, or to a documentary film that a narrative can play with a little bit more easily, I think. So I think some of the problems that, and it's actually easier to make a branded documentary, by the way, than it is a branded narrative, ironically. But some of the problems that documentaries are going to run into, I think, are going to be more complicated than some of the problems that narratives are going to run into, because the narrative, you can always say, well, it's just not true.
But then I think that goes back to John's point about critics and sort of what's important. I think at the end of the day, is it important that there are people who actually see your Gatorade-funded film that might be about a very important issue that the company actually cares about, and so does the director, while at the same time, maybe the brand has very limited editorial influence, or, if any. And at the end of the day, is it more important that X amount of millions of people actually see it because there's real marketing support behind it, than if one critic gives it a good review or a terrible review because they say it was a branded film? I mean, I guess that's what it's all about at the end of the day, really.
I mean, I want to add that there is one complication in brands financing movies from a distribution perspective, and this is actually pretty practical. Is like the number one financier of documentary films is public broadcast, and public broadcast does not play nice with brands because it's publicly funded money. So they absolutely cannot take branded, like POV and ITVS, which is the leading financiers of feature documentaries in the country, probably. They can't. Is that true? Yeah.
I don't know if it is true still.
I'm going to say it confidently.
If it is, it won't be for long.
Yeah, I don't know, man. They're still. I mean, so that's something to keep in mind. And this is part of a transition. And this is kind of a speculative panel, but like linear broadcast in general, because their revenue is selling ad space against the content that you're producing, has a really hard time doing brand finance stuff because other brands get jealous and they won't allow them, which is why you have to go through their ads. ESPN, you have to go through their ad team, right? Same thing with NBC when we did something with Dick's Sporting Goods, right? They feel very strange about that because then they can't sell brand advertising against it. But as things move to over the top, that becomes less of an issue, right? Netflix just doesn't care if the brand's involved. Netflix cares who's watching it and how they can keep subscribers and acquire more subscribers. But just to keep in mind that, like, while broadcasters are financing and buying documentaries, brands financing documentaries will always have some rub. That doesn't mean it's always going to be like that, but there is that does exist.
That's why I think us as content creators, because I'm assuming most people in this room are, documentary filmmakers. I think you have to think about what's the end result of your film. Where do you want to see it? If you're actually, if you're courting brands to support your work, that all has to be part of, your kind of conversation with your collaborators. I think, but then it's interesting from your perspective, because I imagine you're, as the brand, you're going out and sort of seeking filmmakers to create for you. And maybe the distribution is less important at the end of the day, sort of. I don't know.
Well,
I'm curious about that.
I mean, I'll tell you, the passion of the director as they present their idea and the story they want to tell is so incredibly important. I mean, we only give the brief to the right people to begin with. So when we get a brief from a brand, we'll select maybe 4 or 5 filmmakers or groups to even take a look at it, right? We're potentially going to work together, I hope, in the next project. We're working together now. I mean, we're super, super selective. But the brand doesn't see all that. That's our secret sauce, right? What the brand sees with our coaching is the director in person or on Zoom telling the story that they want to make so badly they're going to make it anyway, but they'd love to make it with the brand. And I can't tell you how important and significant has been David Dark, Stephen Cantor. We've had, incredibly talented, this one director, Yoko, that's working with Imagine right now. I mean, the passion that comes through sometimes is almost as important as the story that they want to tell. Because once we green light, it's you and me. Like, it's really like the access for the filmmaker to the brand is incredible. Like, you're in the room with the brand exec. And so to the filmmaker, you get this incredible access. For the brand, it cuts through all the layers. But you have to, as a filmmaker, you have to be open because the brand is going to have expectations, and the brand is going to, there are certain things from a corporate perspective, bigger than the brand, that are going to be no's, and then the brand lives and dies by its competition.
But the brand has to be open to maybe being educated by the
Absolutely.
storyteller themselves.
Absolutely. Yep.
And John Sloss.
And Johnson.
And John Sloss and Eric Sloss.
Definitely.
So
Benjamin.
this could be a spirited conversation for hours and hours and hours, but this is more what we want to talk about, and we're here for you. So let's find out what you guys want to talk about. So questions? Yes, C1.
You can see that?
Yeah,
Do you have contacts in?
yeah, how do we do this?
I think there's a mic up there. Is there?
Yeah.
Oh.
So yeah, I think questions.
But
can
you,
come
but
up
you can
with
just.
my-
I mean, as far as I'm concerned, you can shout it out. But
Yeah, right, yeah. Oh, come on, John.
it's like a bingo.
Battleship. It's Battleship.
I think my question a lot of people might have is, what are the kind of boilerplate expectations your brands will have
About in what regard?
in terms of their contribution to the films?
Ellie?
So editorial and all of the different
Yeah, I
things.
mean, like, what are the practical ramifications of working with a brand on a film?
Yeah,
of
it's a
course.
great question. So, first of all, the brand, the brief is going to be really precise. So, they're going to initially weigh in, and even we may disqualify stories that don't match the brief. For example, if we want to shoot and follow a season of sport in real time, you give me a great archival story, there's no way. Right? If I ask for something focused on women and you give me a great story about men, or if I want US and you give me an international story because the demographic is US, there's no, I just can't green light it. Once you green light, I would say my experience is that the brand is on set more to say what not to do than what to do. And what that can mean is that the products have traits. So if a brand is being associated with having fun with family and friends, you don't want to see the person engaging with the product alone feeling sad. Like, that's not good for the brand, right? If the brand is all about a moment in the workout that's really important to the phase of athleticism, and you use it for something else, a party, you drink that drink at a party, it's not good for the brand, right? So on the set, I would say, and again, all these conversations are had up front, but you still kind of need, I love it when the brand is there because they're going to see something that I may not necessarily see. In the edit, again, my role is really to be the bridge between the brand and the filmmaker and kind of protect both parties. The brand will weigh in, the brand will give notes, but I don't think anything I've ever seen is over the top. And I think, again, part of it is in all the upfront prep. Like, the best scenario is when the brand green lights a story and lets the director do their thing. And God help you if the competing product can't be in there, right? And then you probably need to make sure that the product is just, if it appears, which it probably will anyway, because if the story is the right story, it's going to be in their lives, right? It just has to appear in the right way. Often the director will get final cut, especially if you're working with a really senior level director. The brand will participate either fully or partially. So there are other investors that get to weigh in. But it's a relationship. I mean, we hope to work with all these people continually, so we're not going to be jerks and turn people off. We want you guys all to want to work with us and feel like it's not a bad thing to work with a brand, but it's a great opportunity. So we consider every time we weigh in, we certainly consider it.
And I will say, I mean, PepsiCo is so much better at this than a lot of brands. Like, so it's gonna run. I mean, it has the added value of being true. So it's going to run the gamut in terms of how friendly these brands are going to be to the kinds of things that we want to do as creatives. But the thing that I have found is the only key to success and is not necessarily prized in our industry is transparency up front. Yep. Is just be really, like, just lay as much as you can on the table up front in a very, what would be non-traditional way. Because if you are in the middle of filming and you hit a road bump that wasn't laid out, to the extent that you could have laid it out, that's just not something you want to deal with down the road. And they're usually not that big of a deal, but they become bigger deals because you didn't say it in the beginning. So the way to avoid a lot of this is saying, if Final Cut is really the thing that's most important to you, you should just say that in the beginning. And if you can have the conversation about what that practically looks like, there may be a way to get over it. It's because Final Cut is not like, it's not a religious thing, right? We could actually get through it. But finding out what's important to you and laying everything on the table is the only way you're going to get through that, because it's a non-traditional financier.
But the point is, I mean, what I've heard a lot of documentary filmmakers say is that they've made films that they love, but nobody ever sees them, right? So if the brand is the ticket to scale an audience, you also want to be careful that you want to help the brand create something the brand is going to push out, right? So if you're going to fall on a sword for Final Cut and the brand is going to say, look, we got, if you're going to enter the relationship, know why you're doing it and keep that in your mind. It's not a grant, right? It's a mutually beneficial partnership.
Yes.
Great, yes.
Interesting panel. I find a little part of it disturbing. I'm curious about, because
Which
well, to
part?
speak- yeah,
Is that me?
well,
Is that John? Yeah.
Yeah.
No, in that, in picking the brand, and like a brand like Pepsi, we have an obesity epidemic, and films about obesity might not get picked by certain brands. And understanding that maybe certain brands aren't the purest brand, and in the documentary world, we're very transparent about what's going on or whatever the company's mission is and what they may be trying to sell. So just this trend, I just wonder if people could speak about picking the correct brand for your message.
You should consider it. I mean, I don't want to.
I mean, look, I think what Eric says about transparency and about clarity of, intention is really important. I've been doing this a long time, and the worst situations are always where two people are making, the financier and the filmmaker are making different films, and for some reason they haven't fronted it with each other, or they think they're going to come around, or they just didn't hear it, or they thought, no one will give me money for this if I tell them exactly what I'm going to do. We, at Cinetic at least, one of our sort of keys is, mission keys is transparency, and so we're always promoting that. And I think, if you're upfront about these things, about what your intentions are, and about, you're aware of what brands are, promoting and what their messaging is, then you can avoid these situations.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think sometimes it, what John's saying, I think to take it even further, to use your obesity example, I think if you had a documentary you were trying to do on obesity, you may not go to a company like PepsiCo, or in reverse, you may discover that they have a foundation and it's actually something that they really care about, trying to figure out sort of how do they as a brand sort of responsibly add to the conversation. So it's sort of interesting, because I think you do have to think about that as you,
You have
as
to
you
vet
create.
the brand as well.
Yeah, as
right?
you do.
that's a
But
very-
like,
Just
let's
like you
say
would
you were
any
going to do a
financier, though.
sports-oriented story, you may have no problem going to Gatorade and asking Gatorade if they would have any interest in this. I think you have to think about sort of the integrity of what you want to say and how it should be transparent.
But as counterintuitive as it is, I think you're exactly right. Pepsi could be interested in that because,
yeah, I mean,
They
allows
want-
them
they'll-
to make a
yeah,
take a
I mean, I've been
position.
involved in projects during my career that we would work with brand foundations, actually. And you wouldn't even expect that they would have an interest, but they are very self-aware, clearly.
I mean, the idea that Dick's Sporting Goods is taking an active position against assault weapons, which was a major part of their business, right, is counterintuitive but makes complete sense. So it actually may fit into
Great
this kind of thing, right?
and if that doesn't work out, take it to Weight Watchers.
Low-hanging fruit, John.
Can you talk a little bit about series and how to approach brands for that versus a feature or a short episodic?
I mean, I will start, and I don't know if have you guys done series yet?
We've done series, but they haven't been, distributed. They've been
so-
owned and operated.
So this is, the complicated thing with series is not actually the brand, but it's that series are financed completely differently than a feature film, insofar as they're very commonly, at least now in the day of SVOD platforms like Netflix, Amazon, et cetera, fully financed by the platform. Otherwise, they would be deficit financed with a U.S. broadcaster, and then some independent financier or sales company would finance the deficit for the international, right? That's where the brand would likely come in a financial model, but they're not. It's a much riskier position because no one's financing series on spec, or not at least not without distribution, some kind of traditional distribution in mind. So I just don't. It would be harder to do that as an equity player or some kind of recoupable investment as it would be a like product or promotional based investment.
Or I was just going to say, in my limited experience, but now kind of moving into this world a little bit, I think we, are kind of collectively discussing it potentially with different networks. So there may be a network that's actually a commercially minded
Lorton
network,
Entertainment does that.
right? And maybe you go to a place that actually has commercials or works with brands. And that's one way to sort of approach kind of brand sponsoring.
sometimes the
It's a
series-
sponsorship. It doesn't look. It is.
Or as
It's
a
not. It's not. A,
sponsorship.
it's not a. It's not a.
not
It's
financing
not equity
per
or
se.
a loan.
I mean, I may be the only one in this room old enough to remember that, but that was basically how television started. It was through brand sponsorship of programs.
Yeah.
I feel like Iconoclast, right, who Justin Welch, who I work with, was involved with, I think was sponsored by Grey Goose, Bucka, for like I think all of their seasons actually, and it aired on Sundance. Right?
Yeah.
I think though too, the series may come out of the success of the first project. So if the short doc does well, you know it could go into a scripted feature. Or if a short doc or a short not scripted piece could be viewed as a pilot for something longer or episodic. So sometimes we don't know exactly how the project will evolve, right?
Financing development, right, is a
Yeah.
really great example of how a brand. So then this is what we're working on, right? Taking a piece of IP and then developing it into a series, for example, because all of these series need to be, to an extent, their development needs to be financed before they can actually be pitched to a network, right? So that's a really good place
way
for
to do it,
right?
yeah.
But then you have to think about, and we're in the middle of negotiating one of these deals right now, right? Where does the brand sit in the pitch to the network? Because networks are always going to try, one, they have all the negotiating power because they're the financier of the show. And two, they make all of the revenue from ad sales. So where are they going to, how are they going to take a position on, say, let's say, the sporting goods piece of IP that we're pitching in? Where does their logo go? Do they get a logo? Do they get any kind of credit on the film at all, right? Is it associated? Or do they just take a financial piece of the IP? These are questions that we're working through in real time that don't actually have answers because no one's really gone through them
And
yet.
that's why everyone needs to go to John and Eric to help them negotiate.
Which we'll do
Right.
for a low price.
But it does bring us sort of, there we go. It does bring us sort of full circle on this panel, because the majority of episodics in the future are going to be in non-commercial situations. So
The
you're
SVOD
gonna-
platforms are going to
Yeah.
change all of this.
That's
That
right.
is as much about, it is as much about the medium of delivery as it is about the brands financing this content.
Absolutely.
But I feel like the brands are going to become integrated in the SVODs. For
100%.
sure,
Yeah,
right?
because the SVOD,
they'll have
they
to.
just don't. That's not where they make their money,
Exactly.
right? When it shifts from commercials, from TV being about the commercials, which was like an aha moment for me when I was a kid, to the content being the commercial itself, that is a big difference in how we're understanding how to monetize content.
Absolutely. Yes.
Great. So I just had a couple questions that are probably a little bit more clarification questions. I'm really curious about the brief writing process. So I'm really kind of like, I'd like for that to be a bit more demystified for me. And then also I'm really, and when I say brief, I mean like, is that something that the advertising agency does? Is that something that the brand does? Or is that something that the studio, the brand studio does? And is it like these are the objectives for the business, this is our target audience, and this is like what we want to talk about, or who we want to, like, what the brand why the brand wants to talk about a certain thing. So that's my first question, a little bit about like what that process is like, and then how is that shared? So like, how do documentary filmmakers get access to that? And so I'm a little bit quite, and then my third, like, part of it, I'm so sorry. I hope these are like quick answers. And then my third one was, what's the role of an advertising agency now if brands are having their own studios?
Wow, the agencies are essential. I mean, they're still, television, I don't think TV is dead at all. I just think you're watching it on your phone. Agencies are doing a lot of strategic work and research and doing great creative. The brief is, it's a fabulous question. We get a marketing brief, traditionally that the agency created, and we cut it up and slice it up and whiteboard it and redo it, and it can take 2 and 3 weeks, and it's one of my favorite parts of the whole process. Because the brief, it has to have all the things that you said, but it has to be inspiring. And an agency brief, a marketing brief, is not inspiring, it's factual. So there's a huge thing that we do that's very proprietary because it's my passion, and I'm never gonna tell anybody unless you hire me how you do it. The other thing is, what was the other one? Oh, yeah. So we have a development exec, Robert Candle, who's out in LA, and his job is to be in touch with all the great people and meet people and go to festivals, and I do that as much as I possibly can. You guys have to get to us, and that's hard, but we have to know you. I mean, we're in the business of knowing who's out there, but it's really hard. I mean, it's tough. You have to find a way to get to the people you want to work with. And I mean,
Unfortunately,
I don't know if anybody has any advice on how to do it. It's really hard.
That's when you call up John Sloss,
Yeah.
Eric Sloss.
You get representation, you sign up with a production
it's the
company.
same hurdle
Yeah.
as in traditional film and television. It's that it comes through agents. Unfortunately, like I think probably most of your business has come through agents or agency type relationships.
We have a lot of direct relationships. You'd be surprised. But yes,
Robert
the
was an agent.
agents. What?
Robert used to be an agent.
That's true. He was trained at William Morris. Yeah, so he's got the agent brain. But yeah, I would recommend if you're not really sure where to start, get a great agent.
Yeah. Or come to these panels.
Yes, or come
Or manager or lawyer.
or manager or lawyer. Sorry.
I think he means
Yes.
John Sloss.
Just call Cinetic. They can take care of your entire life.
1-800. Yes.
Hello, it's a pleasure, super interesting. I am Marcelo Buquin, director and creator, and I've been doing branded content for the last 5 years, 6 years, but now I'm very interested in expanding and having a deeper relationship with the brands. For example, I do purpose-driven content. I'm very focused on consciousness, happiness, meaning of fulfillment in life. And because I focus and I kind of specialized, opportunities are coming. And new brands, like next week, I have a pitch with potentially multi-brand thing with the World Happiness Festivals and Summits. And everything comes into my plate, which I love, but I'm kind of like, whoa, this is more than before. Before I had a brief from the brand. Now I'm inventing the brief. My question would be, I have 2-3 questions, if that's okay. One is, I do a lot of segment, 90 seconds, 10 episodes, 15 episodes. And I have access to all these amazing speakers. I would like a brand to finance one series of 10 episodes, another series of 10 episodes. I will have so much content. Can I make after a feature with that material? Can I repurpose that material with all the takes that because I'm going to have so much footage if I'm 2-3 months traveling the world. So that's to be respectful to the brands and see how this can be integrated. And what should I clarify with the brands? They will take a stake on the feature or not, and how?
Well, you should have a contract
You should
before
get a
you
good lawyer.
start. So you need a
Need a
lawyer.
good lawyer.
Definitely.
You
who
need a
can
good
map
lawyer.
everything out.
I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, you may have a specific approach toward it. It really depends on negotiating up front. I would say at the very least, if you're going to creating a lot more material while you're on the dime of the brand, or it's similar to what you're doing for the brand, you should give them the first opportunity to finance the other thing you want to make, but make clear that if they choose not to, they don't have the ability to keep you from moving forward with it. There may be a holdback for a period of time so that you're not competing with them, even though you have a different form in what you're creating, if the subject matter is the same. So there may be a holdback period on it, but it's really ultimately what you negotiate up front going in. If you can spin out all the possibilities from what you're doing, it's better to confront them up front and arrange them. As we say, good fences make good neighbors.
That's good. Yeah, basically open the game, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Great. And second question would be, usually with the way I work, it's traditional. A brief comes, and I support with an agency, and sometimes I'm working directly with brands. Does it make sense for the new models that are kind of reinventing themselves? I have my lab. I'm creating content nonstop, just to train. Can I bring to brands my own ideas? Do you think that's a good model? Of course, doing my homework and understanding their target audience and stuff. Do brands love that I'm just super proactive and I bring sizzle, pitch?
I mean, that's a really specific, it's specific to your relationship with the brand, right? I would never have, when we first met, brought you an unsolicited idea. But now if I think something's, like having worked with Gatorade a little bit more, if I thought something, this is perfect for Gatorade, I would bring it to you, right? And say,
Some
is this
brands
something?
have very strict policies about not accepting unsolicited material.
It's true, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
so it's really specific to
There's-
your
yeah.
relationships, I think.
So it's first the relationships, I do the service, and then I can just
I think,
become.
if you feel like if you feel comfortable pitching them an idea, I think you should pitch them an
And
idea.
they'll tell, believe me,
And they'll tell you no if they don't think it's appropriate.
They may need to own it, they may need you to sign something, or they
Sure.
may say, send it in, they'll tell you.
Excellent. I don't want to take. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right. I think we at least have, hopefully we can get both of you. Or, you. Yes, you, sir.
I'd love to hear some thoughts on projects that are a little bit further along and seeking more distribution and engagement partners. I'm here with a film that has a sport and advocacy angle to it, and our audience is young and female. So, our ideal place for that is honestly with a brand potentially and not a channel. Is that something that you have experience with working with completed projects or things
Yeah.
that are a little further along?
You should call Refinery 29 because they're doing this. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different versions of this, right? Brands can come along. So this is what North Face did with Meru. They actually supported the release. They did not directly finance the production of the film, but they promoted on their website and they did some in-store promotions, which was kind of invaluable to that release. And we were talking about this because we work with Exporting Goods. Now you know. That if they were to put a standee in each one of their stores for a documentary release, how unprecedented that kind of marketing would be, right? So they'd really be marketing partners. And there's a way to recoup that money against receipts, right? Not everybody's going to accept that as a solution, not every distributor, but there is a way to do that. And the other version of this is a media company like Refinery 29 that already has, and you can treat them in a similar way to a brand insofar as they have specific knowledge of specific audiences that they reach on a daily basis, right? Having them come in as a partner in the film and putting together a package for release in a similar way. I think they're doing this right now with Neon. In a partnership, they've done this. We talked to them about RBG, right, for example, to do this, and to not come in as a production partner, but to come in as a release partner. So it's kind of the tail end version of all of the things we're talking about with a brand being a studio. So there are ways to do it. It's the same process. What you have to do is hone in your ask.
For us, right now, it's essential that we're involved
Exactly,
from even before what we're all shooting.
Yeah.
I mean, we need to be at the seed level for a
I mean,
project.
you're an equity
And we're an
investor,
equity
right? 'Cause
investor.
that's so it's different than, right? This would be a P&A investor in a traditional sense.
Well, we are at the finish line. So I want to thank you for being a great audience, and I want to thank the brilliant panelists here. So let's give them a big round of applause.
Well, thank you, Dan.